Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. It's my great pleasure to introduce dear friend and colleague, Doc Porter, now from the University of Pennsylvania, who is going to be talking about the Medieval Electronic Scholarly Alliance, and she'll tell us all about what that means and why it's of interest to classicists as well as medievalists and digital humanists and librarians.
Yes.
And everyone else in this room.
And everyone else. Thank you, Gabby. So thank you all very much for coming today. I understand there was some confusion with the room, so I'm glad you all made it here. I am very recently at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. My position is curator for digital research services, so it's quite interesting. It's an institute for manuscript studies that's within the context of a special collections unit. So I report to the director of special collections, but I've been brought in to lead digital humanities projects. So that's what I do in my day job. MESA, or the Medieval Electronic Scholarly Alliance, is a Mellon-funded project that I have been co-directing for about the past maybe 3 years from the first time we thought of doing it to today, and I'll go into the history of it a little bit more. But it is, as the title of the presentation is, a federated platform for discovery and research. So the first thing that I want to do is spend a little bit of time getting some context, and that is looking at medievalist use of digital resources. So the purpose of MESA is to create a federation for digital medieval projects. And one of the reasons that we developed it is because we saw that there were projects that were sort of being developed, but there was no way to really find out where they are or what they have or how you could use them, this kind of thing. But another concern that I have with this is not only, well, there are these projects and people are making them, but also how are medievalist scholars actually using them? And what is the sort of history of the acceptance of these kinds of things in medievalists? So I wanted to look at three different sort of data sets that I sort of looked at to get some kind of sense of what medievalists' use of digital resources is sort of over time. So the first thing that I did, well, I didn't actually do this in order, but one of the things that I did is I went back and I looked at the programs for the International Congress on Medieval Studies. This is like the major conference for medieval studies in the world. And when I say major, I mean big. So this is about, these days there's around 3,000 people who attend every year. It's been held from, since not 1971, it actually started in the 60s. The first digital paper was in 1971. And since between 1971 to 2012, it was just in May, so I haven't crunched the numbers for 2013 yet. But in that period of time, there were 857 individual what you might call digitally oriented events at Kalamazoo in that period of time. And what I found was that there is sort of a general growth in the number of the relative and actually the actual number of these digital things over this period of time. But the growth is sort of inconsistent. So I went and I sort of looked at two ways of looking at the data. The first thing is I looked at the percentage of sessions at the conference with some kind of digital component. So if you had a 3-paper session that had one digital thing in it, you would count that as a session that had a digital component in it, even if the other 2 papers were traditional papers. So the percentage of sessions that had digital things in them. And the idea obviously being that the larger the percentage, the more, not only the more individual papers you had, but also the more those papers are sort of distributed among the conference. And then the second number shows the same thing in a slightly different way. This is the ratio of digital components to the number of sessions containing digital components. So if you have a 3-paper session that has 3 digital oriented papers in it, your number is going to be 1 divided by 3, which is 0.3, which is a low number. Whereas if you have a 3-paper session that has one digitally oriented paper in it, and the other 2 are traditional, you're going to have 3, or 1 divided by 1, which is 1. So the higher the ratio number, sorry, I am a library. I should say this. I am a librarian. So please forgive me for starting out this way. So I hope that makes at least some sense. Basically, we're looking at these 2 numbers to see how they're going over time. So we're going to start looking at the trends over time, and because the first digital sessions were in the 70s, we're going to start off in the 70s, right? And so I'm in England, so I wanted to, right? Does everybody know who this is? Yeah, this is actually for Faith. And she's not here, so. But now Faith, you have to watch this so you can see. So there we go, our 70s doctor. So we have, in the 70s, a wide variance from year to year. So the first sessions were held in 1971. There were 3 sessions in the entire conference that had some kind of digital component in them, and that was 4.3%. And then in 1975, there were none, right? So it wasn't like it started and then we're going up, but it started and then it came down and then this and this. And it's probably worth mentioning too that the definition of digital-oriented sort of changes over time. So in the 70s and into the 80s, you're talking about creating databases and making, make a BUSA. So he had yes, you're making concordances, and then you're actually printing them out and making books out of them. But you're using computational methods for making your printed books, and then later going into the 80s, you're doing things like desktop publishing, right? But they're still, for their time, they're digitally written, and obviously that changed. So we move into the 80s, and we get a little more relaxed. There are fewer sessions in total that have digital components, but fewer components per session. So you're having fewer, you might have fewer sessions, but the digital components themselves are spread out over more sessions, which is kind of interesting, right? So they're spread out more, but there are fewer of them in total. Moving on into the 90s, I do realize he was only in a movie, but use what you can. You have the number of digital sessions actually growing pretty steadily along with the conference. So between 1% and 2% of the sessions every year, you're seeing them. And this is at the same time that the conference itself is growing pretty steadily. So the percentage is also growing. Or the number is also growing, so it's a steady growth. Except for 1998, which had an explosion, a relative explosion. So you had 3.76% of sessions that had some kind of digital component. It's notable to mention, I think, that this was the year that the electronic Beowulf, or the year before it was published. So there was a lot happening. There was the electronic Beowulf, there was the Canterbury Tales project, Piers Plowman. This was really like the time when they were all happening. On the other hand, the ratio is lower. So you have more sessions that are sort of completely digital, as opposed to having things spread out. So that's a little bit interesting seeing that. It was happening more sort of across the conference, and now it's constricting, and it's happening more at specific sessions of the conference. Now we move into the 2000s, and you've got the number of digital sessions actually growing faster than the conference. So the percentage starts to rise. You're going to 3.5% and 4%. So you're seeing more and more of them. And the ratio also is starting to rise again. So they're spread out more. You're seeing more and more digital sessions. And I should say, too, that the way that I find these digital sessions is by keyword searching the titles, which I think, as we're moving into after 2010, that's getting more and more difficult. And I think it would actually be worthwhile to go back and see, okay, even in the mid to late 2000s, is this a really good way of figuring things out? Because as digital technologies are becoming more ubiquitous, I think what you have are people using the technologies and then going and presenting work based on that. But the paper that they're giving is, here's what I found out about Beowulf. It's not, here's how I use the electronic Beowulf to find this thing out. So this is only really useful up to a point. But I still think it does sort of give you an idea of, at least up to maybe the mid-2000s, pretty good. So then just looking at the spread from 2002 to 2012, and this is just to show that there is still, it's not, again, like the steady move, you still have a spread. 2003, 1.28% of the sessions had a digital component, and in 2009 it was up to 4.39, but it's not like it went like this. It was more sort of going up and down. 2012, last year, there were 4.36% of sessions had them. So it seems to be sort of steadily rise. And then looking at the lowest number and the highest number, this was kind of interesting. Into the lowest ratio in this 10-year span was in 2011, and then the highest was the next year in 2012. So again, it's sort of a steady move, but going back and forth. So that was one thing. So the second thing that I wanted to look at is basically the breadth of, yeah, Charlotte's laughing, the sort of breadth of medieval, and what is medieval studies, and how much does it cover. And for this, I looked at artshumanities.net, and I looked at this last year, last summer, and I was able to search for medieval and figure out the content type in this, and I actually wanted to redo the search for this paper, and I went back, and I know that artshumanities.net has been having some changes, but I wasn't able to redo the search. So the numbers that I'm giving you were actually the numbers from 2012, and I apologize for that, but I think they still get across the what I'm trying to get across. And so the first thing I looked at was the content type. They have text, they have structured data, databases, graphics, spatial, 3D images, sound. So one way to look at this is to say, well, medievalists, use all kinds of stuff when they consider all kinds of things. Another way to look at that is the disciplines that are associated with these. So there are projects tagged medieval in artshumanities.net that are also tagged history, archaeology, modern languages, linguistics, classics, law, all kinds of things. So the idea that it's not just like medieval history, it's medieval everything. So there are all kinds of different digital projects being created for medievalists that cover a broad spectrum of interests. So the last thing I wanted to look at, just very quickly, is work that I did on medievalist use of digital resources through a survey. So I did a survey when I was a graduate student in 2002, and then I revisited in 2011. And I just wanted to compare the findings. So I have this one chart. I hope this will show up well enough. I actually published an article recently in Scholarly Editing, the annual of the Association for Documentary Editing, in which it was really looking at digital editing, but I say a little more about the findings of this project, and this was actually an appendix in that paper. So what this shows is I looked at journals, editions, and facsimiles. So dark blue, which is on the far left, is electronic only, and then light blue, which is on the far right, is print only. And then you go electronic only, electronic mostly, electronic and print the same, print mostly, and print only. And comparing, so I asked this in 2002, how do you use your facsimiles? And nobody said they used electronic only. And of course, and most people said they used print only, that's on the right. Now, in 2011, you asked that question, a fair number of people, this is about 18%, use electronic only. A lot of people, this is like 45%, say electronic mostly. So you have a huge shift in facsimiles, which if you keep up with the way libraries are digitizing facsimiles, it's not entirely surprising that this would be happening. We got this shift. And well, then we'll look at journals. Journals, in 2002, there's nobody who said electronic only or electronic mostly. A few people said the same. Most people use print. So we have like probably 63% are using print mostly, and then everyone else is using print only. And now, 2011, the largest percentage of people, almost 50%, are using electronic mostly. Again, if you have been keeping up with the way libraries have been dealing with journals and publishers have been dealing with journals, This is not surprising. The point of this paper was actually looking at the editions part, which was more interesting because you hardly have, I mean, you have a bit of a shift, but the shift is from print only to print mostly. So this is 2002, and then nobody is using electronic only, and very few are using electronic mostly. So this again, it shows the shift, but it also shows that the shift, it's not like now we're all using digital things. It's like, well, it really depends on what you're talking about. You're talking about facsimiles, well, yeah, and then these other things, and you know why that is more on the paper if you want to read the paper. But I think in thinking about MESA, this was in my head when we were sort of planning this. So coming out of this, it's a broad field. Medieval studies is a fairly broad field, considering many disciplines and a lot of different interests. There's this sort of consistent but slow growth in the interest in the digital, just looking at the conference papers, and sort of a more rapid grow in the use of specific types, so looking at the usage. So then we go to Medieval Electronic Scholarly Alliance. So when Tim Stinson is my co-director. He's at North Carolina State University. And we both sort of independently had been thinking that a federation such as this would be useful for medieval studies. And we both got our idea from NINES. So NINES is 19th Century Scholarship Online. It was founded by Jerome McGann at the University of Virginia in, I want to say, like the early to mid 2000s. And at that time, Tim was actually a graduate student at UVA, and I was just really interested in NINES. I thought it was a really interesting idea, because what they did was they took all these 19th century scholarly projects and created records for objects, digital objects, that made up these collections. So if it was an encoded text, you would have an encoded text as an object. If it was a scanned image of a manuscript, or in their case, printed books, then you would have that as an object. And we thought this was pretty interesting. Then, again, I want to say like in the later 2000s, maybe 2009 or 2010, 18th Connect was launched. And so 18th Connect does the same as NINES, only for 18th century. And so it looked like, hey, NINES is willing to do this. So he was talking to Jerome McGann, and I was talking to Laura Mandel, who's the director of 18th Connect, and they put us together. We actually knew each other, but we didn't know we had this shared interest. And we put together a planning grant to the Mellon Foundation. We had a meeting in May of 2011 and invited a bunch of people from a bunch of different projects. The Roman de la Rose Project, Walter's Art Museum, they have digitized manuscripts, Ecodices, Digital Medievalist, Peter Robinson was there from the Canterbury Tales Project. Greg Crane was there from Perseus, because we thought his experience working with classics would be useful. And it was a really great meeting. Coming out of it, we set up a steering committee, listed here. And they have actually been invaluable in helping us move towards implementation of MESA. So we are part of this group. It's called ARC. It consists of NINES and 18th Connect and MESA, and developing units on Renaissance called Reckon. And I think there are modernists who are working on putting together, we call them nodes, so an ARC node on modernism. And that's really great. One of the reasons that we decided to go with ARC is because they already had the infrastructure built, right? So they built this tool called Colex, which we'll look at in a minute, for NINES and 18th Connect. And it meant that we, instead of having to sit down and worry about building a whole new infrastructure, we were able to take what they had done, extend it in ways that were important for us, for medieval studies, and then to sort of run with it. So we got our implementation grant last June, and we are almost ready to launch. In fact, I'm going to show you a demo on the live site, which is actually live. We just haven't, there's a reason, I'll show you in a minute when we get there, why we haven't advertised it yet. But it's almost ready to go. It's very exciting. So I'm at Penn. We get support from Penn. North Carolina State has been really supportive to Tim on his work on it, and Texas A&M, where ARC is centered, has been really helpful. So MESA actually sits in servers at Texas A&M University, and they have programmers who help keep things running. We do the indexing with them. For our initial launch, we had what we call our 12 initial projects. That's actually grown, so we have a few more than that in the site that's going to be launched. And it's a variety of stuff. And the reason that it's kind of a variety of different projects is because we wanted to show from the very beginning that MESA was going to be able to hold and really represent medieval studies as a broad field. So we didn't, for example, although there are a lot of manuscript collections in there, it's not all manuscripts. Because although a lot of medieval studies is involving manuscripts, there's a lot of stuff that's not manuscripts. So we have Parker Library on the web, Roman de la Rose Project, which is manuscripts of the Roman de la Rose. We have Diane, which is manuscripts, but it's music, specifically music manuscripts, and cataloged in such a way that a musicologist would do their search. We have sermones.net. Yay! So collections of sermons, and those are full text encoded and are searchable transcriptions, which is great. We have the codices. We have the online for SART. Right now, what we have from them are biographies of people. So it's quite different from the other types of material we have. It's actually like a reference material in here, and we'd love to get more of that because it would mean that you could search for somebody's name and you could potentially find a biography of them in one project, and then you could find manuscripts that containing text that they've written in other projects, maybe some that have been fully encoded. So that's sort of the vision that MESA would allow you to find a sort of a broad variety of things. I'm particularly pleased that we have the Gothic Ivories project from the Courtauld Institute. This was we really need to have some, non-manuscript objects, physical objects in here. And that was the one we got. And so we'd love to see more of that in there. And the Walters Art Museum and the Schoenberg Center for Text and Image, specifically the manuscripts, digitized manuscripts at Penn. So there are a lot of manuscripts, but also other things that aren't manuscripts. And we really want to develop MESA to focus on two needs of the community. The first is what I've really been talking about, and that's the aggregated searching. But then the other one is to provide or facilitate peer review. And we did not really focus on peer review so much. We haven't been, and we're not going to be in our initial phase because the Mellon Foundation asked us not to focus on it. So, but we do have peer review built in. We have decided to go with sort of a lightweight open peer review. So if there's a project that would like to join MESA, we'll set up a discussion. So there's a discussion forum as part of MESA that we'll look at in the demo. And you say, okay, you're interested. We'll set up a discussion page for you, and we'll put out a call out to the listeners, to the community, and say, okay, we'd like to include this project in MESA. We'll be creating the index and federating it on this day. Please come and make your comment. And so it's not really a peer review in the sense that if you say something, if you say, I really hate this project, we'll probably include it anyway. But at least your comment on it is there, and somebody else who comes and says, oh, I found this thing, but there are these problems with it. And we really went, maybe during question and answer we can talk more about that, because we really went back and forth about how much review we wanted there to be in there. We decided finally to sort of go with the lowest common denominator. I mean, I hope that it's, your younger brother's Shakespeare page with the blinks probably would not make it in. But so there is obviously we want it with scholarly content, right? But once you hit that determination, which is probably it's going to be basically myself and Tim and the editorial board. Then you would be in. And then we also going to have a second tier. So that's sort of first tier, everybody kind of gets in. Second tier would be more like a traditional peer review. And that would be not, you wouldn't do that for the Walters Art Museum because it's a collection of digitized manuscripts and there's not really an argument. We want to know that they're high quality images, obviously, but there's no really scholarly argument being made. Second tier, or tier 2, would be for, really we envision it for a scholar who has created a digital edition or some kind of other project that's sort of incorporating things and making some kind of argument, and they want to use it for tenure or promotion or something like that. And in that case, then we would get 2 peer reviewers to do a more traditional review. And then on the interface of MESA, that project would be listed with under peer-reviewed projects. So those would be projects that had gone through some kind of peer review. We would also, if you had an edition that had, for example, gone through the MLA Scholarly Edition review project, so the MLA has its own thing, then we would also accept that. Because if the MLA has already put it through peer review, we're not going to do it a second time. Or if it's been published before. So we are hoping to get editions that have previously been published by the CNET, which published the Piers Plowman project. Then those would just go under peer review because they've already been through peer review before they were. So Colex is the software that kind of runs MESA, that makes it all work. If any of you are library science types, Colex is sort of an early sibling of Blacklight, what eventually became Blacklight, which is sort of used, I think, more and more now for library catalogs. And it was originally developed at UVA and Colex, and they sort of work off. So that's sort of interesting. Here's the live site. www.mesa-medieval.org is the URL. And this is the sort of opening page. And you can see popular discussions. These are the discussion pages for the original 12, now slightly more than that, project. So Walters Art Museum, Online for SAR. So if you were interested in simonies.net, you might go in and start a conversation about, here's what I use it for, I'm really happy that it's in here, here are some problems with it, whatever. You can also put tags on individual objects that are in MESA. And so some people have already started tagging. We have Salter. Walters, this is one particular manuscript from the Walters, so maybe somebody is interested in this manuscript and they've gone in and started tagging items, miniature, breviary, and then news. We don't really have much news yet. All right, so the search page, we've got 2 sections. We've got, at the top, we've got just a keyword search, where you can sort of type anything in. There is a suggestion thing. So if you start typing, it'll tell you how many mashes there are for each term. Now there's also this fuzzy search bar here. The reason for that is that spelling in the Middle Ages is not always the same from text to text, even if you're using the same language. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to find a way to deal with this. So if I'm searching for a term in Latin, but it's spelled differently in some other manuscript or some other manuscript description, how can I do that? So one thought that we had was to take a bunch of different dictionaries and do a lot of work, putting the dictionaries in the back end and doing that. We didn't really get enough funding from Mellon. They were very generous with us, but just not generous enough to be able to fund that kind of work. So instead what we did is we put in this fuzzy search bar. And I don't know, please don't ask me how exactly it works, but all I know is that as you move it this way, it will start searching for more and more fuzziness in your search. So it will start searching for eyes. If you search for J, it will start searching for eyes. It will start putting in other vowels, that kind of thing. So if you search for Jerusalem, With the exact fuzziness of 1.0, it will just look for Jerusalem, whereas if you start moving it down, it will start looking for eyes and for other things. So that's sort of the keyword search. And the reason I'm upset that this didn't drop down, because when you start moving the fuzzy bar, you don't get that. It doesn't give you the suggested terms. You can also search for title. Every record has a title. Records can be for any number of things. So we have things like the Walters Art Museum. So the Walters Art Museum, I don't know if you have come across their digital manuscripts. In addition to really great quality digital images, they also have TEI manuscript descriptions of all of their manuscripts. And they're very detailed. So it describes the manuscript, physical aspect of the manuscript. It also, if it's illustrated, it has sections in the manuscript description describing each individual illustration. If there are several texts in a manuscript, it will also have sort of a table of contents, and it will describe each section of text. So for the Walters Art Museum, we actually have records for the manuscript and for all of the illustrations in the manuscript, and then for all of the texts in the manuscript. So if you're searching for a text that's in one of their manuscripts, you'll find it with its own record. If you're searching for the Virgin Mary, for example, you'll find all of the illustrations in the Walters that have the Virgin Mary. You'll also, by the way, find all the illustrations in the British Library database of illuminated manuscripts that have the Virgin Mary in it. On the other hand, Codices only provides Dublin core, sort of very simple Dublin core. So we have very simple Dublin core records at the manuscript level for eCodices. So what we get in MESA is entirely dependent on the metadata that the projects have created for their own use. But title is one of those things that's required there. And again, it's got the fuzzy search. Role is is a field. It's not required by us, but it can be useful. Role is things like authors, artists, illuminators, publisher, scribe, translator. So role is potentially a really valuable thing to have here. So if you know there's a particular scribe, you could search, theoretically, you could search for the scribe and find them. But of course, again, it's dependent on what we get. So if we get metadata where the scribe has been tagged as a scribe, then it will show up here. If we get metadata where the scribe is mentioned but isn't tagged, it'll come up in a keyword search. So there's actually a little question mark here, and if you go over the question mark, it will say, in addition to your searching roles, you should also try your search in the key term fields above. So if you search in a role, don't assume that there's nothing there. Go and do a keyword search. Language, this is fun. The language terms are it's from the ISO list of languages, and both the language and the role drop-down menus are generated automatically out of the index. So if something comes in that's in a language, the language will show up in the list. So if you see a language here, like Ge'ez, G-E-E-Z, I don't know that language, but I had a friend who saw this and he was very impressed that there was something. He's like, is it really there? And I said, yeah, it's really there. If it says it's there, it's there. I think it's from the Walters. So this is a nice thing to see. We have Cornish, all kinds of stuff. But it's automatically generated, so if it's in there, it's in there. And then finally, you can search by year. We do require a computer-readable year in a specific 4-digit, between this year and this year. When you actually do a search, you'll see the year that shows up is a label value, so it's a more human-readable. I was talking actually with Peter Stokes this morning about the year, because one of the things that happens is that you have to take circa 1100 and determine how you make that into a computer-readable year. And we haven't set guidelines for how to do that, but it points to something that probably needs a guideline somewhere. So that might be something to, now that we're over the hump with actually getting this implemented, we can start really thinking about things like that. So in addition to searching, you can browse on a number of things. So we have our projects. The reason that we haven't launched yet is because we haven't actually peer-reviewed any projects, but there's one that's showing up here. So we don't want to launch until all of these projects are together. But you can see here how many objects are in each of these, and then you can start selecting them down. So let's just say we want to look at the Walters Art Museum, and it will give us the list of findings. So this is everything in the Walters, and it'll show up with there's a title. If there were tags on there, there'd be tags. This one has a tag, and that one's an initial. It shows you where it's from. It's from the Walters Art Museum. If you click on this, it will actually take you to the Walters Art Museum website. So you're always sort of one step away from the home of the object. And then there are thumbnails for each one. Some of these don't have thumbnails, either for reasons of permission or because it was technically impossible to automatically get the thumbnail image. And in those cases, there's just a logo. But it's always more interesting when there's a thumbnail there. So if you have a project that you're interested in having in MESA, you should consider how easy it is to grab your images for that. And then if you click more, you'll get a little more information. It'll show you a genre, nonfiction, discipline, art history, manuscript studies, and then the publisher, and then the date. Genre and discipline are all required for MESA, and in some cases you can sort of get them from the metadata object by object, and in other cases you sort of say, well, everything in this collection is, so everything in the Walters Art Museum is tagged manuscript studies, because they're all manuscripts, and so they might be of interest to manuscript studies. Some of the other ones will have additional subject attached to them, because there was information in the metadata that we were able to pull out and get there. And then you can also facet by discipline and by genre. So you can see there are some other, there's poetry, there's religion, sermons, art history, and format as well. Format is required. So is it an illustration or manuscript, a sheet? They should also be codex in there, but they're not. So if you come in and you're only interested in looking at illustrations that are across all of the collections, we can turn off the Walters Art Museum, and we can just look at illustrations. And then we can see, all right, here are all these illustrations. There are 34,000, almost 35,000 illustrations. That's still a lot. Most of them are going to be from the British Library Catalog of Illuminated Manuscripts. Some of them are from the Walters, and then we can sort of keep faceting down by genre. I want to see law or whatever. So I feel like I've been talking for about that much time, and I've sort of given you a peek at what it looks like. So if anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to take questions, or if you want to try, give me some instructions for things to do to try to make it break. I don't know.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any immediate questions or requests for things to search for in MESA?
Well, I've already searched for Byzantium.
Did you find anything?
Yes, to my relief I did.
Oh,
yes,
good.
yes,
I'm very
yes.
glad.
But I'm afraid quite a lot of it was pictures of Westerners attacking Byzantium,
Oh,
which was something of a disappointment.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, says it all, really, doesn't it?
Well, if you have other Byzantine related collections that we could get in, then
well, I mean that's just exactly what I was thinking. I mean, these things are 6 times as useful when they go across the standard frontiers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And luckily, medieval.
Oh, it's so broad.
Yeah, you can throw everything in there, can't you?
That's sort of what I'm hoping is going. I mean, my dream would be that sort of we start putting in everything, and that everything comes in. And my nightmare is that nothing comes in. You know, so it'll probably be something between there. But it would be so nice to have sort of one place that isn't Google. You know, where you can search, and you know that at least everything in there is at some level of quality, you know. So,
I'm interested in what you talk about peer review.
yes.
Of course, the peer review is a very wide thing and complex things if you think of the traditional way we consider peer review. There is pre-publication peer review, proposals that get in and then get peer review after. For a book, for instance, you have a peer review on your proposal, on the book itself when it is done. There is all sorts of things. And there is the review that happens after publication, so which are in a sense a bit different. So they just say normally what it is, assuming that the content has been already peer reviewed before it became a content that is valuable for me to spend time in reviewing it again. So what I do assume that you mean otherwise in here is the peer review is the last part that I mentioned, so post-publication peer review. So those projects that you want to peer review are projects that have been already finished. And it's not just projects or stuff that you say, okay, this needs to be changed, or this is my recommendation. And there is some organ that say, we won't publish if you do not do that. Or do you envisage for MESA? That was actually a question I did also to Laura Mondell once. Do you envisage, this is the rule of this federation, to say, I give you my advice before you finish your project, so then when you go to your funder, when you finished all all the work you've done, you can say, not only I've done good quality, but that is also a certification that I'm good because I've done it. Therefore, some kind of consultancy work on how to make your project better. Or do you envisage a role as well in which you are working together with funders that will ask MESA to do the peer review for them in order to give funding? Because many of us is actually asked all the time to review a proposal, research proposal for funding agency around the world to say, okay, is that a good no? I mean, is that a function that perhaps you're thinking of? I mean, peer review is a big stuff.
Yeah.
And what is the peer review you want to do? That's the question.
So I think here we're talking about the tier 2 peer review, because the first tier is just, we have a discussion up on the website and it gets into MESA. The second tier, I don't think that we had considered the last option that you had, which is providing review for funders. I don't think that we had done that. And in fact, we had considered sort of taking ourselves out of the peer review process entirely and sort of saying to people, well, if you want to be listed in the peer review section of MESA, come to us with your certificate from the MLA that said that you've been reviewed by the MLA and whatever else. I don't actually know. That was part of the problem, is that we were like, well, who else is doing peer review for digital projects? Well, if it had been published, so if you had a publisher who'd done good peer review, you could do that. I guess I would say maybe all of the above, that if somebody comes to us with a project that the funding is over, and it was over 3 years ago, and they've just sort of kept working on it, and now for whatever reason they want it to be peer reviewed, then I think that we would do that, and and we could provide a letter that that said that it had been peer reviewed, and if they had comments. If on the other hand, yes, if somebody came to us and said, well, I've been working on this by myself and now I'm applying for funding, would you please do peer review so I can include your letter with my funding bid, then we would happily do that too. And if they got peer review also during the time that they had funding and then wanted to turn it in when they had the final report. So I think sort of all of the above. I think that there is a lack of peer review options for the medieval studies generally, and if whatever we can do to sort of help that along. I don't want to say that we're only going to do it in certain circumstances. Now, ask me again in a year once we've been doing this, and we'll see, how it goes. Because again, one fear I have is that nobody at all is going to ask us to do peer review, and the other fear that I have is that we're going to be overwhelmed with requests, and hopefully it'll be something between. But I just don't know.
I think there is a general problem about peer review in digital resources. And what does it mean, peer review in digital? And I heard a lot of arguments, pro and cons, different type of peer reviewing. For instance, say, well, we shouldn't. Peer review is a technology that's technology. A methodology, whatever you want to call it, has been invented in a time in which we had limited resources for publications. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we had limited numbers of pages you can fit into between the covers, either in a journal or a number of books you can publish, then you need peer review. And just you can publish the good one. Now that on the web you can publish whatever, it will be the user that chooses where to go. So we don't need peer review at all. We may just have comments and feedback. That's the kind of thing. So it is an argument that may be good, but it's a bit problematic because our academic work and recognition what we do is based on the fact that we can say that it's peer reviewed.
Yeah, and I think that the reason that we've included this peer review is that I agree with you that peer review, it should be based on comments and people will use what they use, but the fact is that at least in the US, in order to get tenure, there are certain things. Yeah, I know. I feel,
the US here, no.
In order to get tenure, to get promoted, you need to have this piece of paper that says, this is what, and maybe, having this sort of open. That's really why we decided to have this very, very open process for as far as getting things in, because we'll say, well, we'll just put whatever comes along is not the blinky tags, but anything, if it's high quality, even if there's somebody over here who doesn't agree with the scholarly argument, well, we're going to put it in there anyway because it's, quality, and then they can come on to the comments page and, have their say, and then other people can come and read that and make their own decisions. So I'm hoping that open review part will maybe play more of a role.
Just wondering if you have any views on open access, and because I've just did a search on an area I'm interested in, and the first link I've got is
that intellects.
Yeah.
So I personally, and I think MESA as a sort of existing thing that isn't just me, open access is really, really important. And anybody who came to me with a project and said we're interested in being in MESA, first question that I would ask is, well, is your content open access, and is it available for openly for people to download? I mean, one of the things that we didn't actually look at here is that MESA has I think it's in the community section. There is I don't see it. A thing where an exhibit builder, where you can actually you can sort of pull in digital objects that you've searched for, and then construct an essay or an argument or something, or a project really sort of around it, and then publish it. And obviously that only works if you're able to pull in things that are sort of have some kind of open access license attached to them. At the beginning, we did kind of talk about only including stuff that was open access, and just decided at the end that it wasn't, putting up that kind of barrier right at the beginning just wasn't something that we wanted to do. So we do have things, and they're at various levels. So the Intellects published material that's in there that's the only material we have that's that constricted. So if you could do a search, and if you find, we can even, it's right, it's on the screen, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for, and then if wherever you are isn't subscribed, you can't actually see the text, and that's sort of one extreme. The other extreme, so here we go, it's going to try to come out here. The other extreme is the Walters data, which is completely open access, and anybody can take it and use it. Most of the stuff is someplace in between. So, for example, the Gothic Ivories project, you can do a search, and you can, find the holdings, and then when you click on that, it just takes you out to their own website. And this is how MESA functions. So it just basically takes you to the website, so you can see and you can actually access them, but you can't do what you really want to, or what I really want to do, which is like actually take them and use them. So I don't.
And I suppose there are conceptually two things sometimes it can be a registry of metadata or a repository of content links, and both are valuable. But it is nice to have both, I guess. And that seems to be
that's
your
sort of, that's sort of what we have.
Yeah.
Selected metadata and then links to the objects.
Can you filter your search by availability?
You can. Yeah.
So you say only show me things that I can see.
Right.
And only
free
show me
culture.
things that I can use.
Right. So.
Right.
Well, right now it's by free culture, which is basically open access, and in this case, because although you can take them and see them, they're not open access, so it actually comes up as a 0.
Yeah.